This video is a part of the network of videos that I have been doing relating to my own fantasy trilogy, The Defenders of Aphalas, and the further world building of, Aphalas. And these videos do take time to make. I sometimes alternate them between streams if I do them in batch, or I record them independently, which is why the editing can sometimes be a bit different. But please do like and subscribe if you enjoy the content and want to see more. There are other books in the realm as well, Soul of the Gem, Code of Chivalry, that sometimes also share some content. If you would like to pick any of these up in ebook format, or in the case of the first Defenders of Aphalas book and Code of Chivalry, paperback, you can pick them up on the Ko-fi page, which has its link in the description. If you don't want to sign up but you still want to support the channel, the link to the Twitch will also be in there. Currently I stream Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and it tends to be afternoon, evening UK time. And outside of that, the links for the Instagram, the Discord, and the two Facebook groups, the creator and then the page, will also all be in the description, so please do check them out as well. And on with the video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel, and to this, a new update for the lore of Aphalas. And this time it's going to be a bit different, because we're going to be, well, I say different, not really that different. We'll be focusing on the humans, but it's going to be giving a bit more context in a way to where the lore is about to go and as to why. So, if you've seen the recent videos and things, I have mentioned the Kingdom of Revloror and Cafaltier a lot, and that is because one is about to disperse into a civil war and the other is about to disperse into a rebellion. And overall, the reasons why this is happening can be dated back to basically Tonrif's war. During Tonrif's war, and this is just an illustration of his domain. I don't actually, this map is a bit out of date now, but in the war, Tonrif launched an invasion, a dual-headed invasion actually, into the Kingdom of Revloror, after having pushed the Dracons back and forced the Wood Elves back to the passage. And this little pocket here is where he invaded, straight into the realm of Heracloch. However, he also sent ships around and hit in the cove, so there was a two-pronged attack. And during that time, Heracloch got fairly quickly overwhelmed, and the peoples of Revloror under their king of the time, which, if I just return, because I get him and his son confused quite a bit, it was Sarngor. No, it wasn't, it was Sauron. And nearly forgot it, and I will just take that panel off now. Okay. Why has it gone down there? Oh my god. Sorry. Anyway. Actually, I've got... Right. The forces of Revloror under Sauron ended up retreating to the then capital, and I know that's a bit difficult to see, but it is Jarethil. And just to highlight, just noting here, obviously the different regions have different noble houses and everything. Haracloch is headed by House Brinzen, and they're quite important to remember, and Jarethil is, whilst it is stationed as the capital, its actual people who occupy the region are House Zeebthil. And Sauron married Caris Zeebthil. Just a nice little footnote there. But in the Siege of Jarethil, which did happen because Tonri's forces were pretty much able to just occupy the cove and essentially surround Jarethil and cut off a large proportion, King Sauron was actually slain in a duel in the Royal Hall against Tonrif, although he did manage to inflict a heavy injury onto Tonrif, which actually forced him to retreat, and that did end up slowing up the demon advantage. And Sauron's son, Sankor, say that 5 times fast, he retreated the rest of the Revloror forces to this little sort of faded region. I apologise, there's a very zoomed out map, so I had to zoom in. But it's the Spire Hills, the sort of hilly incline, because Revloror exists in the Revloror Vale, so very hilly, and ideas like that. But they also held briefly around the coast. However, as they were holding, there was an unfortunate situation that happened further south in the West Bank. The House of Hirith and their current leader, who at the time was Verner. Yes, it was Verner. Verner Hirith. He was the second son of Ferlin. And just going to point this out perspective-wise for the moment, the line of Hirith suffered a lot during Tonrif's war. The eldest of the sons of Fair, Finlane, was slain defending the western bank. His second son Ferlin fell at Dothalon. His youngest son Fervis managed to survive, but Ferlin's children, Valkith and Verner, also both fell. And yeah, that's the thing, in the space of not even a year, like 4 notable members of the line of Hirith are all slain. And that leaves... But the remnant of all of this is that... Sorry, I have to keep moving back because I keep tabbing out, and I know it's awkward and I apologise for that, but... I wish I could just like have it fixed. Because of what's happened with the fall of Jarethil, the rest of the forces that were headed by Verner in the Western Bank, they end up defending the cove for several days and then end up retreating into the massively impassable hills where Dothalon is located. And they end up holding up in refuge there for years. And they do eventually get freed and rescued, but the feeling of abandonment is something that does not go away. and the anger continues to just fester within them over it, especially Velquin, who is the one daughter of Ferlin and had seen both of her elder brothers and her father all fall during this conflict. So anyway, Tonris War goes on, can skip several years down to the line to where we are now, and there's been plots occurring after the death of Sauron. One day I'm going to remember which way around it is. During Galakaros, his son is obviously next in line, but he's too young. So Velian Fortizga, and Fortizg just for the noted, and I have done a video on Rovlaror, so a lot of this is already covered, but it's just given the basis. Farallon is heavily tied to the House of Rothdane, which is the royal line, and she ends up taking the reins of control and command as a sort of regent, whilst her son obviously comes of age and things. But during this point, Rovlaror has, and about 30, 40, quite a few years have passed since the invasion, and they have mostly been repaired, and there's actually a new city being constructed as well. But there has been plots, and they've sort of spied their opportunity now with a boy king in sort of, well, training, I guess the best way of phrasing it is, and a regent who not everyone necessarily respects. So what they choose to do is that the houses of Hirith and House Brinzen of Harrowclotch, who also suffered fairly prominently, and I will just note, they don't actually lose as badly in terms of the amount of people in their line, but what they do suffer is still extreme. I mean, their entire land gets overwhelmed. But they hatch a plan, and they want to try and get House Zeebthil on side, but Zeebthil actually end up being quite reluctant, so pretty much all you have at the moment is obviously some disloyal individuals, but primarily just these two regions, Harrowclotch and Dothalon. Jarethil is neutral. The Spire Hills have their own sort of independent guard, so they attempt to stay out of these things as much as possible, although because of their location they're pretty much going to be forced into it. But then you have the other side with Fortizg and Rothdane, who are both joined and everything, so it's a fairly balanced. You've got like two houses against two with one undecided. But they know, the people within the line of Hirith are smart. They're aware that if they tried to raise their banners in rebellion, the first instinct of Velian and the others would be to look over to the borders for help in Tarasil and Cafaltier. Now, they don't think too much in terms of Tarasil, because the thing about the Kingdom of Tarasil is its heavy focus is around horsemen. It's fairly flat terrain and things, and nice grassland, which means that in the hilly areas of Rovlaror it's not going to be that great and that much of an advantage. It could probably like take the Cove, but outside of that. However, Cafaltier are the greater presence and threat, in part because of their navy and part because they're very strong, very renowned military. And they need to try and hatch a plan. And the plan ends up actually involving, and I know you can't see the name there, but that's meant to say Bauanoth. Again, it's too much of a faded out map. But Bauanoth, as you can see, is like a meeting point between the three realms, and it's exchanged hands numerous times. But within Bauanoth you have hang on. Got to find it now. I believe it's... Is it House Norgwyn? Sorry. That's the previous one. Yep. House Norgwyn. Bauanoth. And... unfortunately, one of their children just looked at the name and it immediately went out of my head. Terith, son of Marlek, younger son and a bit more, well, kind of jealous and things. He decides to... He's not well loved, and he's quite renowned of being a jerk. Keeping it PG-13. But in him, Vernier finds an ally. And an ally that's going to end up causing a lot of commotion, because they decide that they need to do some underhand tactic to ensure that ideally both Cafaltier and Tarasil, but primarily Cafaltier, are unable to lend support, to just try and basically buy the forces of Rovlaror time, or no, the forces of the rebellion time to try and gather strength before attacking. And moving on to Cafaltier for this segment, their ruling line is House Thess. It was formerly House Thaig, but it's briefly moved over to Thess now. And House Thess operate out of Larath. King Kalerth is the first sort of Thess king, and he does very well. He's incredibly prominent. He survives through a lot of he survives through all of Tonroof's war, participating in the elements, but he then falls at Galakaros in the Battle of Baralath. And in his absence, his already very renowned eldest son, King Kalern, ends up taking the reins. And Kalern is the first of his name as well. Really hate that I just used that as the statement there, but he's already renowned because during the Idros Years of Sorrow, it was actually a combined effort of Cafaltier and the Forest Dwarfs of Alaros that ended up helping free Naros from invasion and basically bought the trolls time to defeat the ogre hosts that were present. So Kalern had already gained renown amongst the protector races of being a brave warrior, and he was now king. Unfortunately, he falls ill after... Sorry about the dog. Hang on. Okay. He falls ill, and he ends up only being on the throne for 10 years, and then he passes, and he also passes with no children, and then we get left with an interesting situation. You have his three siblings, Cordelia Thess, who is the only sister and the eldest of the three, but she is already currently betrothed to, and I know it's not on the map on this map, but Cathimril, which after the Battle of the Salbanoth became a combined effort of Tarasil and the Wood Elves to construct as a signature piece and also more security. And it was given to House Algernon, Darenth Algernon being one of the key individuals of that, and Cordelia is infatuated with him. And then you have the two brothers, Varnor and Hauron. It is known throughout Destinal that Varnor and Hauron, almost said Vauron, do not get along. They are not brothers who see eye to eye over many things. They have some fairly public issues, so whilst Varnor largely tends to occupy down at the south, particularly around Pelachoth and the Great Harbours where his wife resides, his wife being of House Murin of Pelachoth, the sort of where Cafaltier gets his name for the Great Seafarers, basically. Hauron ends up actually reserving, though in Calantanin or Cavaron he tends to switch between the two, so they literally kind of keep each other out of the way by staying at opposite ends of the kingdom. But with no sons, Varnor being the next eldest son with Cordelia already occupied and away, Varnor is the one who's going to be named king, and this is where the plot decides to subside. And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty obvious kind of plot, but obviously to the characters involved, they don't know any of this at first, but the line of Hirith in the effort with their rebel allies to try and weaken the force of who they're going to rebel against are using a outsource of Balanoth, an already volatile territory because of its border position, not statement, to throw Cafaltier into disarray by assassinating their new king. And it works. Varnor is poisoned and killed. And at this point, Varnor does already have a son named after his elder brother, Kalan. But the finger gets immediately pointed at Hauron, and this is where the divisions start happening, and this is a royal coronation, what happens here with Varnor, where he gets poisoned, so pretty much what you have is you have the witnesses of all the main lords of Cafaltier, you even have some other visitors, like you have Darenth Algernon, you have King Arion of Tarasil, you have King Laros of Talamarith, you even have the current High Warden paying them a visit, but the confusion just spirals out of control, and Hauron ends up being forced to flee, but he doesn't actually flee back north, he takes refuge in Larath for a time, where he actually seeks counsel with Cordelia on what he should do, whilst after mourning their father, Kalan just becomes incensed, and with his mother they start to plot how to bring Hauron to justice, because they are absolutely convinced it is him. And the member of House Norgwyn who it was, or the assailants on his side, quickly don't hesitate and they flee, and they flee out of Cafaltier and discreetly make their way supposedly up to Dothalon, but it's not actually confirmed whether he is still there or whether he has gone elsewhere with some potential help. And the thing about the Kingdom of Cafaltier right now is that the houses of Cafaltier, and I do need to do Cafaltier's video, you've got the previous royal family of House Thaig who occupied Larabalth and did occupy Calderoth, and they kind of still do. You have House Murin, which I noted occupied Pelajoth and the Great Harbours, House Thess for Larath, and then you have Caforon and Calonth Tanin, and they are occupied by House Vartha, VAA, so Vatha, Vartha, whichever way you choose to pronounce it, for Calonth Tanin, and then House Antralt for Caforon. And the thing about it is that it's very subjective and everything. Like, the Great Harbours are tied to Pelajoth, so that's where the seafaring comes from. But Cafaltier are also known amongst the humans that, in pretty much every way, they're like the... I don't want to say the antithesis, but if you had to take one of the other fantasy races from Aphalas, but then make the human equivalent of them almost, Cafaltier are that for the ogres. They have the seafaring, they have the best siege equipment, which comes out of Calonth Tanin. So you've got basically the sailors against the engineers in some cases. And then you have other situations and difficulties with how this civil war is forming, because Larath is completely divided. Some believe that Hauron did this and did poison his brother. Others believe that he wouldn't, and others stay neutral because they remain more loyal to Cordelia. So Larath is divided in about 3 different ways. Calonth Tanin quickly sides with Hauron because of his wife. Hang on. Yeah. And House Antralt seem quite likely that they'll join him. House Murin are a bit different. Well, no. Morgan tries to make demands of them. Morgan being Varnal's wife. This is difficult to keep track of. But they end up taking some time, but they do eventually form, and Larabalth kind of just get sort of pressured into joining as well, not wanting to break face with the crown, especially with their royal ties with House Thaig and everything, as not siding with them immediately could seem like attempt at usurping. But then you come back to Bauanoth with House Norgwyn, because unfortunately Marlek Norgwyn, who is the head at the time, he is very much aware of what his son has done, and he knows that this is going to cause a lot of problems, and he knows whichever side he goes for, there's going to be death and destruction, so he opts to actually try and keep his land neutral. So at the moment, with how and I haven't actually wrote any of this, but this is the plan. So as of right now, because of the actions of House Hirith and a offset of House Norgwyn, Cafaltier is now divided in about... Oh, you've got the crown on one side. No, you've got the loyalists of Kalern on one side, you've got the loyalists of Hauron on another, you've got a small offshoot who follow Cordelia, and then you've got Bauanoth trying to keep independent as well. So it's split 4 different ways at the moment. But eventually Cordelia does try and stay out of it, knowing that Larath is going to be in any gateway between the battles. So she goes up to Cathimril with her husband, and it's not really known what's going to happen next, because there are obviously other eyes watching all of this, but this is also quite helpful for Rovlaror, or not Rovlaror, but the rebels, because that's what they wanted. And there is a open statement that they launch out about disapproval and wanting to incite rebellion with all of this going on, and it forces Velian to actually send a force just to try and calm things down over near Harrowclotch, because that's where the statement actually comes from. And it goes very, very wrong. Because at this ambush of Harrowclotch, trying to recall where we are now. Oh yeah, I do need to know. Do I need to actually note that? No. They can be deferred, but well, it doesn't need to be deferred. But basically, at the ambush of Harrowclotch, which does happen, Felquin Hirith is killed, despite leading part of the ambush, and pretty much what happens in the ambush is the forces of Harrowclotch attack, and then the forces of Dathalon come from the flank. And yeah, the loss of Felquin is sort of damaging for the rebels' efforts, but they still have Vervis and the Fervis, as well as Felquin's children. One named after her father, Ferlin, and the other Felk. But the real damage comes from elsewhere. And that's actually in... It's not in the royal line of Rothtain, it's in the line of Fortizk. Velian's line. Just as a reminder, Velian is currently the regent. Because she loses her two youngest brothers, and now she has... And I will just bring the map back, because Fortizka is Farallon. But at this point, Velian was one of 6 children. Her elder brother Martek was killed in the invasion of Idros during Galakaros. Her younger brother Rylin is... No, younger sister rather, Rylin is married to a Zeebthil of Jarathil, which kind of helps keep them neutral. Her her next younger brother is actually kind of temporarily absent, Kylith, as he is, or at least he was, the commander of the Rovlaror fleet, but now he's heir to Farallon. And then the 2 younger brothers, Kirin and Elith, and both of them are slain at Harrowclotch, and this just sends Velian into a rage. And it sends all of Farallon into a rage, because they were 2 rather loved nobles. So Farallon immediately draws its banners up to protect Rothtane and take on the rebels. And this just puts things into a very awkward situation, because you've got Heracloch and Dothalon, and the battles to come are going to be quite strained and things, because basically the ambush at Heracloch, yes, it was a small company, but it was a small company with a very symbolic blow, because in all honesty, the forces of Hirith and Brinzen lost not too much. Whilst Velian literally lost 2 of her brothers in the fight. So there's going to be multiple battles plotted out and everything for all of this. Obviously this is it's going to be long-winded, because you've got a rebellion and you've got a civil war, and then there's going to be something else underneath revolving around the person who fled from Banwanoth. But I do want to just note again as to why these other realms aren't involving themselves. Tarasil obviously is in a really awkward spot now, because they've got a civil war to their south and they've got a rebellion in the neighbouring kingdom to their west. So they're kind of best bet is to just kind of stay secure, especially with a territory with one of the royal line of Cafaltier married into. So they've kind of got limitations of what they can do, and Arion has to try and keep a lid on things. Talamarith, on the other hand, is a bit of a different one. King Laros is aging, and whilst his force is powerful, and it would be a lot to be able to just back in and support, and I think the best way of saying it is he's feeling his mortality now. He knows he doesn't have overly long left, and he's been focusing on trying to marry children off and things, but it's also notable, and I cannot understate this, is that during Tonruf's war, and for a long time, Tartak was taken by the Dark Elves, and it took a long while, and even the involvement of a bit of a coalition between the Temple Guard, Talamarith and Cafaltier to take it back. But after Tonruf's war, it took quite some time, but Talamarith have only just sort of been given it back by the Temple Guard. So his eyes are now firmly looking back that way to Shah and things, considering Shah is right there. But so his eyes are constantly fixed on that. Tarasil, or where they are, the Temple Guard do not involve themselves in things like this unless it's an absolute, just complete and utter destructive emergency, but they've just reordering, and also are about to have potentially some of their own problems internally. Tonruf's domain obviously wouldn't help anyway, but also at this point is non-existent. The Dracons of Daranthal are currently leaderless, because at this point, when all of this kicks off, Trelvin has vanished, and with Trelvin absent, they are having a lot of problems, or potential internal strife and things. And then you've got the Wood Elves of Arakan and Elgarth. Thronsier is now focused, alongside some forces of Dracos, of the construction of Nasir Labeth, the actual city itself, as a haven, and their eyes are also fixed elsewhere for potential other threats and things. So it's not really because of negligence, it's because they're caught up in their own affairs. But as much as Tarasil and Talamarith this is the beginning of what will be known as the sort of fall of the kingdoms of Destinal, at least the human ones. And yeah, it's going to be rather destructive and tough. You've got two different sides and then two different sides with neutral parties in both. And then underhand things as well will happen. And I just want to highlight some of the little areas here. Is like, yes, the forces of Cologne have the navy, and Cafaltier's navy is incredibly strong. But in real reality, yes, they could launch an invasion of Cafaltier through the eastern shore, but there's nothing to really blockade, because this part of Cafaltier doesn't really receive support from the sea, so the navy is kind of mitigated in some cases. Whereas Carlton and this whole area is known for its siege engines and things, so Hauron, if he gathered enough strength, could actually march and do some damage on the cities potentially. But then that would probably make him seem more like the aggressor as well, so there's all of that. Whereas, honestly, the fight in Rovleroy is far more even call. Like, one of the things that does note, because I did mention the Rovleroy Navy. The Rovleroy Navy... The Rovleroy Navy... The Rovleroy Navy is incredibly crippled at the moment. It took a heavy hit during the Battle of Gallicaros, or the Crisis, and bear in mind that this was only this all starts kicking off not long after that, because Destinal was actually fairly unaffected by it. But yes, the Rovleroy Navy was seriously damaged, so any presence of them is limited at best. But anyway, I think that's where I'm going to call that for today. So for those of you on YouTube, thank you all for watching. Please do comment, like and subscribe. Please do share with your friends. Check out the links in the description if you want to support the channel. And I shall bid you on the next one with possibly more news on Aphalas Book 3, the ending of the trilogy.